historically, 50% of work time is actually wasted. So if you've got 32 hours to do a job and 50% of work time is wasted, you've only got about 17 hours a week to get the job done.
The AI Advantage. Welcome to the Evolvepreneur AI Advantage Show, and I'm your host, Richard Wray. My mission is to help entrepreneurs understand AI and use it to their advantage. Today's special guest is Daniel Tolson. Daniel's innovative AI technology helps business leaders analyze their emotional intelligence and strive to become the best versions of themselves. Today, we're talking about using AI to become a better leader. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Richard. Pleasure to be here.
Hey, Daniel, great to have you here. And this is a first for this show. I know what the answer is going to be, but Daniel, where in the world are you?
Taiwan. And I know you've drunk our bubble tea before.
Oh, I'm a big fan. It was the first place in the world where I had bubble tea. It's a fantastic place. I really do like being in that part of the world. It's one of my favorite parts of Asia, so a great place to be. But Daniel, before we get into some of the cool things that you're doing, you've got an amazing history. I'd much rather you gave kind of a little summary than the half-baked version I would have done.
In 2015, I wanted to become a better leader, and I was searching for answers, and I'd done a lot of personal development. And I remember one of the programs, my facilitator said, "You've got to lead from center."
Mm-hmm.
I thought to myself, what is lead from center? I even asked the facilitator, what is lead from center? And they said, from the center of who you are. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm 36, I don't even know who I am. So I went on a journey and I started to find people who were getting results that I wanted. I flew to America and I met a very famous workplace psychologist, and she asked me to complete a scientific report. I completed the report, and when she gave me the report, the first thing I asked her was, have you been spying on me? How did you figure out all of this stuff about me? I said, I've been trying to figure this out for 36 years. And she said, Daniel, well, welcome to the world of science. And so I made a pivot in how I was doing business. And I said, I've got to start to trust in science. And I had learned more about myself in this 30-page scientific report than I had in the previous 30 years of my life. I knew my strengths. I knew my limitations. I knew how to overcome my inner obstacles and achieve my goals faster. And since learning about these scientific methods, I've delivered more than 10,000 scientific case studies into the science of emotional intelligence. And that's been from people who are starting a business, getting a promotion, and even billion-dollar businesses who want to get a push to the next level. And that's the journey I've been on for more than a decade.
Sounds amazing. Now, we're using AI, but you're doing it in a really innovative and intriguing way. Why don't you tell us about some of the stuff that you're doing?
The very first personality profile that I took was a Myers-Briggs type indicator, MBTI.
I have done the same one, 16PF and this sort of stuff,
Yeah, I think everybody's done it. I went to Korea recently, and you can do it in the main street.
Yeah.
And I completed the report, and I thought it was very accurate, but I also had this inner sense, did I influence this?
Mm-hmm.
Based on how I want to be perceived, based how I'm feeling today, did I want to respond accordingly? So I was never confident that that report really demonstrated my strengths and inner potential.
So I understand that, then what we're saying is when people fill in a form, whether they do it consciously or subconsciously, they may actually be biasing the results, thinking, this is what I should be saying.
Absolutely.
Okay.
If we think about another popular report, it's called a DISC assessment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sociably acceptable to have a 20 to 30 point increase in your C-style, which is compliance, when you're applying for a job. And consultants like myself around the world, we understand that people want to say that I'm very attentive to detail. I'm not a risk taker. I'm not a rule breaker. And they'll do that when they apply for the job. And that's called a bias. And a bias, the problem with that is if I want to apply for a particular job, I'll show myself in a particular light.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were to hire me based on that report, you may get a very different person working for you. And that's what we call a bias. And I've always had that frustration because after doing tens of thousands of case studies, people would often say, Daniel, but I feel different when I'm at home.
Yeah.
Daniel, I answered this way because this is how I wanted to show up, but it's not really me. So over the years, what we've developed is AI technology. And the AI technology removes all the bias. Before, we used to do pen and paper, yes, no, 1, 2, 3 on a computer. Today, all we have to do is a 90-second voice recording, and it will determine our levels of emotional intelligence. And because we're recording the voice, we're just measuring brainwave frequencies. And there is no bias. It's just a raw recording of what's happening inside the vocal frequencies.
And in advance of today, I actually did take this test. So let's go through some of the results so we can give people an idea of what they can expect.
Absolutely. Well, the report that we did is called a mind report. And in 90 seconds, we're looking at 1,440 emotional triggers in your voice. And what we get from that is we get an 8-page scientific report. We look at your stress type. Now, everybody's stressed. We all know it. The statistics in America say that $300 billion is lost every year because of stress.
And would that be due to people not being able to go to work or not performing well?
Showing up late, working too late, overtime. A company that I work with recently, because the team was under stress, they weren't able to perform. It was costing the company more than $100,000 per year in overtime.
Wow.
People have stayed back. They're not rested enough. It can also be workplace dynamics. We talk about team dynamics, and there's 4 stages. A team always comes together, and it's called forming. And in the forming stage, just like everybody's in a honeymoon, I accept you for all your deficiencies and your shortfalls. You've done something wrong, but I dare not say a thing. And we're in that honeymoon period. After the honeymoon period disappears, we go into what's called the storming phase. And most businesses get caught in that storming phase. Most businesses that never succeed are always in that storming phase. Somebody comes into the team, causes disruption, somebody leaves. They go back to the honeymoon phase, somebody's employed, they go back into the forming stage, and they never get out of it. After that, we have the norming stage. Now, a lot of businesses that get through the storming phase just normalize. They never get any significant results. They never set the world on fire in their businesses. And that's true for about 80% of the business population. And only about 20% of businesses get through to the final stage, which is called performing. And there's one thing that's in common with every single team that gets to the performing stage. One, the businesses have very low turnover, almost nothing. Secondly, they're all working within their comfort zone, which is a good thing. And thirdly, all of those companies have had behavioral-based trainings, which includes the mind report that we do.
Now, that bit at the end is very, very intriguing. So you could have people that are absolutely amazing at their jobs, but it's that performance focus that seems to be the key to getting people or an organization, a team, to hit that next level.
So when we talk about working within your comfort zone, it's about working with your natural strengths. For me, I'm very competitive. We talked about this before. I'm an Australian champion athlete, state champion 3 times, extreme games competitor. I'm very competitive. But if I'm put into a work environment that I can't compete, you'll never get the best out of me. And when people have to adapt or change their personality, it creates a lot of stress. It leads to mental illness. It leads to psychosomatic illness. It leads to illness and a lot of days off. Because to hold back your personality, it takes huge amounts of energy. And we see this all around the world. So you want people working within their comfort zone. If you've got a competitive person, give them a job that enables them to compete. If you've got somebody who's a real peacemaker and a real mediator, don't put them in a high conflict area. Put them into an area where they can use those natural strengths and you'll get the best out of them. They don't need to jump up and down. They don't need to pump themselves up. They're working from their comfort zone. And so once you understand people's behaviors and personality, like we're going to talk about stress styles, then you can position them correctly. And a high-performing person statistically will bring in a 5.4 times return on your investment in them. So if you pay them $1, the company will win back $5.4 for every dollar they spend. An average performer statistically, you only get a 2.4 times return on that investment. But the interesting thing is the average performer and the high performer get paid the exact same amount. What would you rather do? Pay $100,000 and get $240 back, or pay 100 and get 540 back. That's the difference.
You're touching on some of my favorite points, especially with this podcast and some of the other ones I do about business in general. And, there's the Peters principle where people can be promoted from, their area of competence, their level of incompetence without any training. He can be an engineer and he gets made the manager of engineers, brilliant engineer, but has never been trained on how to be a manager. So has no competency. So they've obviously, using the terminology that you've got, moved outside of that comfort zone. So it sounds like there's a huge amount of training at multiple levels involved with what you're talking about.
We've got to understand people. Mm-hmm. And the first rule is that people are complex. Our personality has been forming since the time of conception. The way that we think, decide, take action, and the results that we get are a result of our brain processing style. And that's been forming since the time we were in utero. And so if we can just map how your brain naturally makes decisions and you get conscious awareness of that, you can repeat that over and over again, and you can consistently make a better decision. But if you don't know how you make decisions, then what will happen is you just use guesswork continuously. How to do that? Don't know. I'll try again. And that leads to a lot of stress. So we've got to understand how the brain works, and then we say to this person, you are the best at making this type of decision. This is the perfect job to suit you. And there's a terminology for that, and it's called the science of job fit. And if you trust in science and look at the science won't give you an opinion, it'll give you a fact. And once you've got the facts and you've got the real facts, then you can make an excellent decision. And if you put people in the right seats, then you'll get the right results. And so that's what we're looking at.
Makes a lot of sense. So why don't we go through some of the results that I got?
Okay. Do you want me to share the screen?
Please do. Go ahead.
Okay. So when we did the mind report for you, what we identified is your stress type. Now, all of us experience stress. There's no good stress. There's no bad stress. There's no my stress is better than yours. We just have stress. And there's two types on the same continuum. On the left-hand side, we have logical stress. Now, if you experience logical stress, you'll get stressed by things that are on your to-do list. You'll get stressed about health, finance, work, and your career. When we have a high level of logical stress, the signs and symptoms are overthinking and extensive analysis. So this is the type of stress that impacts you. Based on that, Richard, does that make sense to you? Have you seen those patterns in yourself before?
It does. When it comes to anything, I obviously try and look at things and do the best version possible. And there's a huge amount of analysis when I do these things.
Mm. For me, my stress type is also logical stress. I deal with people all day, every day, and I've done that for the past 14 years. I just deal with people. I don't deal with systems.
Yeah.
So for me, I don't lose sleep over people. I lose sleep over things on my projects and my to-do lists. And this is really common. My wife and I, we analysed 200 Australian business leaders last month, and we found at least 90% of them had that same logical stress. Why are they good at business? Because they're good with people. But they lose sleep over the business growth. Now, the importance of that is what we say in emotional intelligence is if you can't name it, you can't tame it. So if you say I'm stressed, that's so vague and so ambiguous that you can't do anything with it. But once you can narrow it down to the type of stress, then you can put strategies in place to be able to manage that stress. You can't always erase it, but you can learn how to manage it and you can learn how to regulate your emotions. And that's why we say, if you can't name it, you can tame it. If you're losing sleep over your to-do list, first thing you got to do is stop putting as many things on there, or you got to start to tick them off a little bit faster.
Interesting. So that's a classic example of just knowledge is power, but you've also got to take on board this knowledge and do something with it, which I think a lot of people, and I would obviously fall into this trap as well in my past lives, you're just trying to do too much, or you're being asked to do too much, which is another area. So in this same scope of conversation, do you ever run into situations where people are working very hard and they're just being asked to do too much?
Always. In the science of job matching, when we look at a position, we're looking at 3 to 4 key result areas that somebody should be able to achieve in a given amount of period of time.
Mhm.
Now, statistically, if you work 40 hours a week, by the time you have a little bit of travel, you have a bathroom break, you have a lunch break, you have some interruptions from the boss, you have a couple of team meetings. Out of that 40-hour work week, 8 hours disappears immediately in ad hoc activities, which only gives us 32 hours a week to achieve our key accountabilities. But because we've got so many competing priorities, oftentimes we don't know what's the highest and lowest priority. A lot of people don't even know how to hit their key accountabilities. There's no clear measurement. But in business, what we have to remember is what gets rewarded gets done. So if somebody sees a very clear target and they have a reward attached to it, they'll go out and do it. We've also got to understand how much time they need to do that job. So, for example, recently I was looking at a position description and the individual had 27 different key accountabilities.
That sounds terrifying.
The position description was 7 pages long. And the employer was complaining that the individual wasn't hitting the KPIs. They couldn't even articulate what the target was. It was never clear enough. So we've got to understand that if we work a 40-hour work week, we've only got about 32 hours to achieve the targets. Historically, 50% of work time is actually wasted. So if you've got 32 hours to do a job and 50% of work time is wasted, you've only got about 17 hours a week to get the job done. Historically, people only spend 30% of their time on what's urgent and important in a business. So in the science of job matching, we've got to have a look at time allocation. We're going to have a very clear target, and we're going to have a very clear measurement of success. And if we do that, the 32 hours that they work, 100% of that time will be spent on what's urgent and important. And that person will achieve 2.5 to 3 times the results of any other person in the same given amount of time. And if we think about those high performance that I mentioned before, that's why you get a $5.4 return on every dollar you spend on wages, because they get the same results, but in a third of the time.
So going back to the title of the show today, using AI to become a better leader, you've got AI, it's studying the analysis that's coming out of the system that you've got, and I'm sure there's other stuff that's on top of that as well, and several thousand different metrics that are being measured off that 90 seconds worth of voice. So it's absolutely astonishing that you can get so much out of such a short amount of audio. But how can leaders use this? So let's say they apply your technology to their wider team and to themselves, obviously, because I always think that if somebody's using something like this and applying it to their team, they should at the very least do it to themselves as well. I think it's just rude not to. But how can they look both inwardly and outwardly using this technology to be better leaders?
We have 4 conflicts, and this is a very important topic for leaders. We can have a me conflict, and some of us just don't like certain parts of our personality. For me, for many years, Richard, I was told I was too competitive. You told me I'm too competitive, but I'm an Australian champion athlete. I'm a 3-time state champion. I've competed at the Extreme Games, and now you're telling me that's bad?
Was this by the people you were beating, by the way?
That was by the people I was beating in the workplace.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
So for me, I felt that being competitive was an advantage. I started to feel that it was a disadvantage. So I felt conflicted internally. So whenever there was an opportunity to compete, that tall poppy syndrome we have in Australia and the United Kingdom, I didn't want my head chopped off. So I'd just fly under the radar. So that's the first conflict.
But how much, just on that one, how much of that is cultural, though? You're saying other people are saying this to you, that you're too competitive, making you feel bad about your inner nature, the thing that's got you to the position where you are. How much of that is a social thing than anything else?
Well, I think for Australians and British, we're of the same blood. And it's part of the culture. We experience it at school. We experience it in the workplace. We experience it at home. And I believe that it's imprinted in us from the time of conception all the way through the imprint period from ages 0 to 7. We experience it in our socialization period and we experience it in the modeling period. It's in us as a culture. We see it in our movies. So it gets transferred us not to us just genetically, it's also mimetically. It's passed on through conversations. It's that rumor of a guy who got shut down or the girl who spoke up and lost a job. We start to fear. And so those things are present in our culture. But if we go back to a me-you conflict, if we don't know enough about ourselves, we tend to have conflicts with others. So when you and I grew up, we probably used to practice the golden rule. Treat others the way you want to be treated. It's very biblical. It sounds lovely. Yeah. But I'm competitive. I'm aggressive. If I treat everybody else like that, I'm going to have no friends. So what we say today is we've upgraded to the platinum rule, where we have to treat others the way they want to be treated. But we can only do that if we have science, because I can't spend enough time inside of your brain to figure out who you are. Imagine every leader having to do a full psychological degree on each person. You'd be there for 20 or 30 years trying to understand.
It'd be a long time, without a doubt.
And so if you don't understand the other person, then you have those conflicts. The third conflict is a me role conflict. Now, when I was in real estate, you need somebody who's competitive. You need somebody who's going to chase. Real estate was perfect for me because you had to be competitive. But people who didn't have that competitive gene in them, they didn't tend to do as well because they didn't understand the importance of chasing the work, and it would lead to burnout. It would lead to fatigue. Fourthly, we have what's called a me environment conflict. And this is coming back to the tall poppy syndrome. If you're in an environment that doesn't appreciate performance, you'll get your head chopped off. If people don't appreciate performance and you being a winner, they will pull you down. They act like crabs in a bucket. So if we can understand each person on our team through science, then what we can do is we can get the right person on the bus and then we can get them into the right seat and performing immediately. And if we do that before the client is onboarded into a business, then retention rates increase by 1,800%. They start day
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, what I find very interesting about what you're saying here, and using AI to analyze things and to do it quickly because it can identify patterns, which is a really great use of AI. One of the things that stands out with what you're saying, and there seems to be so many contradictions within organizations and companies where the company wants to be successful, but anybody that could potentially take that company to the next level because they're a doer, because they're somebody who is competitive, they get pushed down, like you say that, or they get pulled down. They say you've got the bucket of crabs and the one that wants to get out isn't going to be allowed.
Well, it's the old tale of performance or politics. Mm-hmm. If you get to the top via politics, then you've had to stab people in the back on the way up. And what will happen on the way down? They're going to stab you in the back. But if you get up there by performance, nobody can ever discredit you. It's like all these athletes who have taken performance-enhancing drugs. What happens? They lose their trophies. But the person who's clean and done it the right way gets to have that trophy and the recognition for life. So what we have to learn is the difference between politics and performance. If you get to the top via politics, expect to get stabbed in the back at every stage. But if you get there by performance, you'll be a champion and you'll remain a champion for a very long period of time. And if you get the AI at the start and you look at the personalities, like I'm looking at yours now, we can see here with your personality type, you're the giver. In the very first episode of your AI Advantage show, I could see these personality traits coming through. I could see that you were very attentive. Just like you are now, you're paying close attention to me. And what we say is that attention is the most precious commodity on the planet. You're present. You're here. You're listening. Most people are just listening to find a gap in the conversation to say something spectacular. They're waiting for you to breathe in so they can have their next thought. But you're present, and this is what it shows. And this is what I saw in your first episode. Also for you, you're very warm-hearted. We had a great conversation, and I felt like I'd known you for weeks. We'd spent minutes talking, but I felt like I'd known you for so long. So if we understand the person that's going to come and work for us, then what we can do is we can learn to adapt, adjust, and respond. So I look at your personality style here as the giver, and I understand this is a bit of a playbook to interact with Richard. So instead of asking Richard to adapt to me, as the leader, I make the adaptation. So I adapt to you. I treat you the way that you want to be treated, and I'll get the best out of you, and we'll get the best out of the situation. And that's the advantage of the AI. 90-second voice recording. I can understand your personality and to adjust to it as soon as I make you. And I can do that for every single person in an organization. And that's what makes a better leader.
That is absolutely fascinating. If there's one piece of advice that people should take away from our conversation today, what would it be?
Trust in science. Trust in the science. You've got to do what doctors do. And when I went on my search in 2016, I said, what do doctors do? Why is it that you go and see a doctor, they do an examination, they do a diagnosis, and 9 out of 10 times you take the medicine? What are they actually doing? And I realized there's a connection between science and what we do in leadership. First of all, we have to do an effective examination. We've got to understand who the individual is. We then have to trust in science and let the science do the heavy lifting. In a 90-second voice recording, what we know about you could take us 30 years of personal relationships to understand because we have a diagnosis. And then thirdly, we can offer a prescription. And if you think about medicine, prescription before diagnosis is malpractice. And if we think about leaders, if I try to get you to adapt to my leadership style, that's malpractice. I should figure out what's important to you and adapt to that, and I'll get the best out of you, and you'll get the best out of me. So trust in science.
That is absolutely fantastic advice, and thank you for your kind words as well. It's warmly received. But Daniel, tell me, where can people find you, and why don't we call out the name of that particular service that you've said so many great things about?
If you'd like to experience the Mind Report for yourself, you can go to my website, danieltolson.com, Mind Report, free. It only takes 90 seconds, and you'll learn more about yourself in 90 seconds than you possibly could seeing a psychologist for the next 50 years.
Fantastic. Well, it doesn't sound like you need it, but I wish you the best of luck with sharing this technology and smart uses of AI with the world where it can really help people, which is the number one objective of this show, to help people through AI. Well, that's a wrap on another awesome guest episode for the Evolvepreneur AI Advantage show. Just before you go, if you like this episode, we would be very grateful for a 5-star review. Please also consider recommending the show to a friend or two. Make sure you subscribe for future episodes at aiadvantage.show right now. Until next time, I'm Richard Wray, and if you're an entrepreneur, get the AI advantage today.